I opened Twitter the other day. I know, my first mistake. I was quickly informed by some of the loudest and dumbest accounts on there that Canadian cities had been taken over? That Montreal, for example, had been shut down because people were protesting indigo. A store whose CEO has a foundation that provides scholarships to foreigners who go out of their way to join the IDF. You know, the military responsible for what Amnesty International and a UN special committee have concluded is a genocide. One former media personality claimed that a mob had taken over downtown Montreal, screaming like, quote, wild animals. Now, I happened to be downtown the very next day after she posted this, and I took this picture and this one and this one. So I guess Montreal hadn't actually fallen? Wild. Even Indigo was already open again. But to hear Canadian columnists and Shopify tech bros talk about these protests, which happened in other Canadian cities too, they apparently posed an existential threat to Canadian society. I want you to listen to how these guys are talking to their followings and consider the fact that these dudes have platforms with institutions that allow them to shape our country's worldviews. A National Post columnist said, "They're coming for you next." A Toronto Sun columnist appeared to call for mass deportations of any non-citizens who were protesting, which he characterized as, quote, supporting terrorism. The CEO of one of the richest companies in Canada, Shopify, said of these protests that, quote, standards are slipping and, quote, law and order has to enforce behavior. It's non-stop messaging to Canadians that protests that come and go in a matter of hours are a real threat. Meanwhile, do you know what happened in northern Gaza just 2 days after these guys were all freaking out because a bookstore was briefly protested? Israel's 2-month onslaught on northern Gaza's last operational major health facility, Kamal Adwan Hospital, finally managed to put it out of service. And one of the last doctors operating in the area, Dr. Abu Safia, who had previously buried his 21-year-old son in the health facility's makeshift graveyard because an Israeli strike on the hospital gates killed him, was arrested and taken to a military base and detention center. This was one of the last moments he was seen before he was taken. But at least it's not a bookstore being protested, right? He was taken to the detention center that made headlines for its human rights abuses. To their credit, I did see one of the columnists who was freaking out about the bookstore weigh in on this. The Toronto Sun columnist did take a second to retweet a claim that the doctor was a Hamas colonel. A claim that, as CNN notes, no evidence has been provided for. This is a massive chunk of the media landscape in Canada. It's cowardly and disturbing. And it's horrifying to think about how this impacts public perception of issues up to and including the ongoing genocide. What do you think of all this?